For 12 years, Evelyn Carter had lived in silence. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. A middle-aged woman with a reserved smile, neatly tied hair, and a calmness that made her blend seamlessly into the background of the small town she now called home. To her students at the local community college, she was just Professor Carter, a sharp but kind aviation instructor who preferred chalkboards and flight simulators over lengthy speeches. Her neighbors knew her only as the polite woman who waved when collecting mail, but rarely joined neighborhood barbecues or town events. It was the perfect disguise. Her modest brick house sat at the edge of town, overlooking a patch of open fields where wild grasses bent with the wind. Inside, her life was stripped of excess. The living room contained little more than a worn leather couch, a sturdy bookshelf stacked with technical manuals, and a small wooden desk where she graded assignments. No military memorabilia decorated the walls. No photographs of squadron mates or medals in display cases betrayed her past. Even her laptop's screensaver showed nothing but a blank, rotating clock face. Evelyn lived carefully, deliberately, erasing every trace of the woman she once had been. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, reminders of that life still crept in. Some mornings, when she brewed her coffee and sat on the porch before sunrise, her eyes would instinctively scan the skies. It was a habit she couldn't shake, scanning for contrails, listening for the distant thunder of engines, reading the movements of birds as though they were formations of fighters. The habits of a pilot did not die easily. Her students admired her knowledge, but assumed it came from books. She never told them the truth, that every lesson she taught came from hours in the cockpit, that every warning about never trusting a calm sky came from experience dodging missiles, not reading a manual. They didn't know she had once flown faster than the speed of sound, or that her call sign, Viper, had once been whispered across air bases with respect. Instead, she let them think she was simply a gifted academic, someone who had studied aviation from the safety of a desk. That illusion was easier than explaining the truth. It wasn't fear that kept her silent, it was exhaustion. Her years as a pilot had been filled with adrenaline, yes, but also with loss. Too many comrades had never returned from missions. Too many funerals had etched themselves into her memory. When she finally walked away, she hadn't done it out of cowardice. She had done it to survive, to breathe again, to remember what silence felt like without the endless roar of jet engines in her ears. And so she built a civilian life from the ground up. At the college, she had become something of a mystery. Her lectures were crisp, precise, and oddly practical. She taught not just equations of lift and drag, but also the instinct of reading weather fronts by smell, the importance of listening to the rhythm of an engine rather than just its gauges, the way a pilot should trust their gut as much as their instruments. Her students joked she sounded like she had flown 100 missions. She would laugh, brush it off, and tell them she just read too much. Still, some of the more observant ones noticed the way she tensed at the sound of low-flying jets from the nearby base, how her eyes would flick toward the windows, tracking the flight paths automatically, how she sometimes drifted into silence mid-lecture, her gaze far away, as though she were hearing voices on a radio that no one else could. The truth was, Evelyn Carter never really stopped being a pilot. She only stopped flying. The small town she lived in offered safety through anonymity. People respected privacy here. No one pried too deeply into her past. The local grocer knew her order by heart black coffee, oatmeal, and the occasional bottle of wine. The librarian saved her aviation magazines, assuming she was just an enthusiast. And the mailman, a cheerful man who never noticed her sharp posture and measured steps, assumed she had once been a schoolteacher who retired early. She let them believe it all. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, when the house was dark and the world outside lay still, Evelyn would find herself sitting at her desk, staring at a small, worn box hidden in the bottom drawer. She almost never opened it. Inside were fragments of a life she had sworn to leave behind. An old leather patch with her call sign embroidered in faded gold letters. VIPE. Are a black and white photo of her squadron, smiling despite exhaustion, their arms slung over one another's shoulders. A pair of flight gloves, worn thin at the seams, and one medal she had never wanted, but could never throw away. Whenever her hand brushed the box, she pulled away as though it burned. Some nights, though, she would lift the lid just for a second, just to remind herself that it had been real. Then she would close it again, shove it deep into the drawer, and bury herself in lesson plans or books until dawn. For 12 years, she lived like this. Every day followed a predictable rhythm: lectures in the morning, office hours in the afternoon, long walks through the fields in the evening. She kept her world small, manageable. Friends were few, and she preferred it that way. She could laugh politely at a colleague's joke, share coffee with another professor, even smile at her students' enthusiasm. But no one ever got close enough to see the cracks beneath her calm exterior. Her silence, however, was not impenetrable. Occasionally, whispers from her past would surface. A news article about fighter pilots breaking records. A documentary about an operation she had flown in but never acknowledged. The rare moment when she caught sight of a jet streaking across the horizon and her heart raced like it used to. Each reminder was a ghost, tugging at the threads of the identity she had buried. She ignored them all, telling herself she was stronger than memory. But deep down, she knew the truth. Legends are never buried forever. And though Evelyn Carter thought she had escaped the life of Viper, the skies had a way of calling their own back. The world might have forgotten her name, but the day was coming when it would be spoken again, not as history, but as reality. For now, though, she lived quietly, believing she was safe in her chosen obscurity. What she didn't know was that destiny was already circling, like a predator biding its time. And when it struck, it would shatter the 12 years of silence she had so carefully built. Before she was Evelyn Carter, the quiet professor, she was known by another name, one that still lingered like smoke in the memory of those who had served beside her. Viper. The call sign had not been chosen. It had been earned. Sleek, fast, and lethal, she had struck in the skies with precision and ferocity. Her instincts as sharp as a blade. Commanders trusted her, wingmen clung to her, and adversaries feared her. To be in a formation led by Viper was to believe survival was possible, even in missions where odds tilted toward disaster. Her journey had begun like many others. A cadet, too young to understand the risks, too stubborn to back down. From the moment she first sat in the cockpit of a trainer jet, she understood something that couldn't be taught. She belonged in the air. While others studied equations and flight manuals, she moved like the aircraft was an extension of her body. Instructors noticed. Fellow cadets whispered. Within months, Evelyn was outperforming pilots who had years more experience. But it wasn't just her skill, it was her nerve. During her first deployment, she flew into conditions that made veterans sweat. On one mission, with communications scrambled and visibility dropping to nothing, she navigated her squadron back to base through sheer instinct, reading the sky and her instruments like an artist reads a canvas. When they landed, shaken but alive, one pilot muttered, "She's not human, she's a Viper. Strikes fast, never misses." The name stuck, and soon it became legend. By her second year, she was flying combat missions that pushed her to the edge. Her squadron trusted her to lead them into the fire. Dogfights were where she shined, her situational awareness uncanny, her reflexes almost supernatural. She could read an enemy pilot's intention before they made the move, rolling her jet into positions others would have considered suicidal, but always emerging on top. Stories of her kills spread. Whispers drifted across bases. She got another one. Vipers at 5. No, 6. The number didn't matter to her, at least not at first. She wasn't chasing glory, wasn't counting victories. But the military counted for her. Ace was a title few ever achieved, and she carried it before she was 30. For those outside her circle, she was a figure of awe. For those within, she was something rarer. A leader who carried her squadron, not by shouting or posturing, but by presence. She never demanded respect. She earned it every time she brought her wingmen home alive. But legends are not built without scars. Combat left its mark. She lost wingmen, young pilots who had looked at her like a sister, or a mentor, or even a savior gone in flashes of flame, torn apart by the very skies they thought they had mastered. Evelyn learned early that victory in the air often meant burying pieces of her soul on the ground. There was one mission she never spoke of, not even to her closest comrades. A mission that ended in chaos, where her choices had saved hundreds, but cost her the life of someone she could never forget. To the world, she was the ace who pulled off the impossible. To herself, she was the pilot who had to live with the ghosts of the ones she couldn't save. Every medal they pinned on her chest weighed heavier than the last. She accepted them because she had to, but in the quiet of her quarters, she would stare at them with resentment. Glory, she knew, was built on sacrifice, and hers came at a cost too high to bear. Her call sign spread beyond the Air Force. NATO allies, foreign bases, even adversaries who studied American aces knew her name. Enemy pilots briefed on her reputation. Avoid her, some were told. She's unpredictable, dangerous. There were rumors, half myth, half truth, that her presence in the air turned the tide of entire engagements. But fame is a double-edged sword. The higher she rose, the more she felt the weight. Journalists begged for interviews. Higher command wanted her as a public face, parading her achievements as proof of American dominance. She resisted. She wasn't built for cameras. But no refusal could shield her entirely. Articles appeared anyway. Her face, blurred in photographs, circulated. Her name became synonymous with invincibility. Yet Evelyn knew she was anything but invincible. The breaking point came quietly, not with fire or glory, but with exhaustion. After years of missions, years of funerals, years of waking up drenched in sweat from dreams of plummeting aircraft, something inside her fractured. She began to wonder, not just if she could continue, but if she wanted to. It was during one dusk patrol, cruising high above endless desert, that the thought settled into her mind like a stone. I can't do this forever. The cockpit, once her sanctuary, felt like a prison. The sound of engines, once her heartbeat, became noise she longed to escape. When her final deployment ended, she didn't make a speech. She didn't host a farewell party. She simply walked away. She returned her gear, turned in her uniform, and disappeared. The Air Force lost one of its brightest stars, but Evelyn didn't look back. To her comrades, her departure was abrupt, even shocking. To her superiors, it was a waste. But to Evelyn, it was survival. She wasn't leaving out of weakness. She was leaving because if she didn't, she feared she would lose herself completely. The military tried to honor her with ceremonies, but she declined. They wanted her story for recruitment campaigns, but she refused. They wanted her on talk shows, in books, in interviews. She vanished instead. And for 12 years, she succeeded in burying Viper under the ordinary, quiet existence of Evelyn Carter, civilian. Still, her legend never truly died. Pilots who had served with her still told stories in bars, passing down her name like a myth. New recruits heard the tales half in disbelief, half in awe of the ace who could outmaneuver anyone, who read the sky like a second language. Some dismissed her as exaggeration. Others believed every word. But Evelyn herself never spoke of it. Not once in those 12 years. In the quiet corners of her life, she still carried the burden of every mission, every comrade lost, every narrow escape. And though she convinced herself the world had forgotten her, whispers remained. Somewhere, in the mess halls of distant bases, her name still lingered. Somewhere, her legend lived on. She had buried it, yes, but the ground was shallow. Because legends, no matter how deeply buried, do not stay dead. And Evelyn Carter, whether she admitted it or not, was still Viper. When Evelyn Carter walked away from the Air Force, she believed she could reinvent herself entirely. No more call signs, no more combat missions, no more whispered stories in base bars about Viper. That identity, she decided, would remain locked in the past. What she didn't expect was how much effort it would take to keep her mask intact. Civilian life was not difficult in the way flying had been, but it demanded a new kind of discipline. She learned how to be invisible. In her small town, she was just another face in the grocery store, another pedestrian on the sidewalk. Nobody looked at her twice. She had mastered the art of blending in. Her home became her sanctuary of simplicity. No aircraft models decorated her shelves, no framed photographs hinted at a past life. Even her wardrobe was deliberately unremarkable. Simple jeans, plain blouses, practical jackets. She avoided conversations that might touch on her history. When asked where she grew up, she gave vague answers. When asked about travel, she said she preferred the quiet life. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. It was just an edited version of the truth. At the community college, she taught aviation with the cool authority of a professor, not a combat pilot. Students assumed she had studied textbooks for decades. None suspected she had lived the material. To them, she was simply Professor Carter, sharp, reserved, and oddly hands-on. Her teaching style often caught her students off guard. While other instructors relied on diagrams and rote memorization, Evelyn demanded instinct. Numbers will guide you, but they won't save you, she would tell them. Sometimes the sky changes too fast for charts. Sometimes you need to feel it. The students didn't know she was speaking from the experience of dogfights, where seconds decided life or death. They thought she was eccentric. Some found her inspiring, others intimidating. She was fine with both. Outside the classroom, her life was measured, almost ritualistic. She woke early, took long morning walks across open fields, and brewed her coffee the same way every day. In the evenings, she read books, mostly history, sometimes novels, rarely anything that risked stirring her memories. And yet, the past was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time a jet screamed overhead from the nearby base, her heart reacted before her mind caught up. Her muscles tightened, her pulse spiked. She would stand still, eyes locked on the sky, tracking the aircraft with the precision of someone who had once flown them. She knew their formations, their climb rates, their turns. She could tell when a pilot was struggling, when a maneuver was sloppy. Her students noticed the way she froze when those sounds filled the air. They joked that she looked like she wanted to join them. She would laugh, brush it off, and quickly change the subject. Inside, though, she felt the ache of something she thought she had buried. Sometimes at night, she dreamed she was back in the cockpit. The roar of engines filled her ears. Her hands gripped the stick, and the world around her blurred into streaks of light and shadow. She woke with a start, chest heaving, the phantom hum of the aircraft still in her bones. She always told herself it was just a dream. But she knew the truth. It was memory. Evelyn kept her distance from people. Not because she disliked them, but because she knew the danger of letting someone close enough to glimpse the real her. Small talk was safe, colleagues were tolerable, and neighbors were kept at arm's length. She smiled when she needed to, laughed when expected, and retreated when conversations grew too personal. But despite her efforts, she couldn't always hide the cracks. One afternoon, a particularly sharp student asked her directly, "Professor, you talk like you've been there. Have you ever flown one of these planes for real?" The classroom grew quiet, every eye fixed on her. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. She shook her head. "I read too much," she replied smoothly. The class laughed. The tension dissolved. But inside, her stomach twisted. Moments like that chipped at her carefully constructed facade. Each one reminded her that no matter how much she tried, the truth was woven into her very being. Her knowledge, her instincts, her habits, they all betrayed her. Her home was the only place she allowed herself the truth. There, in a locked drawer at the bottom of her desk, she kept a small wooden box. Inside were the fragments of the life she denied: her call sign patch, her flight gloves, her squadron photo, her medal. She almost never opened it, but when she did, she sat in silence, staring at the ghosts of her past. Sometimes she traced the embroidered letters of Viper with her fingertips. The name still sent shivers down her spine. She would whisper it under her breath, as though testing if it still belonged to her. But when the memories surged too strongly, she slammed the box shut, shoved it away, and buried herself in work. To her neighbors, she was just Evelyn Carter, the woman who smiled politely but never shared much. To her students, she was Professor Carter, the instructor who demanded they think like pilots, but never admitted she once was one. To herself, she was something in between. A soldier trying to be a civilian. A fighter ace pretending to be ordinary. The facade worked for a while, but cracks in the mask grew sharper each year. Every roar of a jet overhead pulled her back. Every dream of the cockpit reminded her of what she once was. And though she told herself she was free, she couldn't silence the ache in her chest when she looked up at the sky. The truth was simple. You can bury a legend. You can erase its traces, hide its symbols, and pretend it never existed. But legends live in the bones, in the blood, in the rhythm of the heart. And Evelyn Carter, no matter how carefully she hid it, was still Viper. Her facade fooled the world. But it didn't fool fate. And fate, she would soon learn, had not forgotten her. The day began like any other, with Evelyn Carter convincing herself that life could stay quiet forever. She woke at dawn, brewed her coffee, and walked through the dew-wet fields outside her home, listening to the soft hum of insects and the rustle of wind. It was ordinary, safe. That morning, she had a scheduled appointment at the nearby Air Force Base, not as a pilot, not as a soldier, but as a consultant. The college where she taught often loaned her out to assist with civilian contracts training programs, simulation reviews, even air traffic safety protocols. She had agreed reluctantly. The irony was not lost on her. The woman who had once commanded squadrons now sat in meetings about paperwork and training slides. But it paid well and kept questions away. The base itself was familiar yet foreign. As she passed the gates, the crisp salute of the guards stirred something long buried in her bones. She gave them a polite nod, but inside, the old reflex to return the salute tugged at her muscles. She ignored it. She was not Viper here. She was Ms. Carter, civilian consultant. The meeting that morning was tedious: binders, charts, discussions about flight simulator updates. Evelyn listened, contributed when required, and remained quiet otherwise. Nobody in the room knew who she truly was, and she preferred it that way. To them, she was just another contractor with impressive technical knowledge. Then, just past noon, everything changed. The base's calm rhythm shattered with a piercing alarm. Red lights flashed. A voice over the PA system cut through the air like a blade. Medical emergency in flight. F-22 formation unstable. Immediate assistance required in Tower 1. The conference room erupted. Officers leapt to their feet, papers scattering. Evelyn froze for a fraction of a second before instinct kicked in. Her body moved before her mind caught up, following the rush of personnel toward the control tower. As she climbed the narrow steps, she felt her heartbeat shift. It wasn't the panic of civilians. It was the sharp, trained thrum of a pilot responding to crisis. She hated how natural it felt. Inside the tower, chaos reigned. Controllers barked into headsets, their voices sharp with fear. On the radar screen, the glowing blips of F-22 Raptors wavered unsteadily. A pilot had collapsed mid-flight, leaving the lead jet of a four-ship formation rudderless. The wingmen were panicking, struggling to stabilize without colliding. The Raptors drifted dangerously close to one another, their tight formation unraveling into chaos. Leaders unresponsive. A controller shouted, "Flight path unstable, possible mid-air collision." Another cried, "Get a new lead up there now." But there was no new lead. The Raptors were already airborne, already seconds from disaster. Evelyn stood at the back of the tower, silent, watching. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She told herself she was only an observer. She told herself this was not her fight. Yet every fiber of her being screamed otherwise. She could see what others couldn't, the blind spots in the Raptors' positioning, the hesitation in their roles, the sloppy spacing between jets. One wrong move and 4 pilots would die. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. "Don't do it," she told herself. "You left this behind. You're not Viper anymore." Then came the sound that broke her resolve, the panicked voice of a young pilot over the comms. "Tower, we're losing formation." "I don't know what to." The fear in his tone pierced her like shrapnel. She had heard that voice before, in 100 variations. Young, scared, about to die. Her mask cracked. "Someone has to lead them," an officer shouted, desperation edging his voice. "We need a command voice on the channel." Evelyn's hands moved before her mind caught up. She reached for the spare radio headset on the console. For a split second, the room fell silent as people noticed the civilian consultant stepping forward. Someone started to object, but then she spoke, her voice, steady, sharp, commanding. "Raptor 2, this is control. Roll left 30 degrees. Hold steady. 3 and 4, tighten your spacing. You're drifting. Trust me. Follow the lead." The effect was instantaneous. The panic in the airwaves stilled. The Raptors responded like soldiers snapping to attention. The room, moments before chaos, froze into stunned silence. Because the tone of her voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the voice of a civilian consultant. It wasn't the voice of a professor. It was the voice of a pilot who had commanded skies, who had led men through fire and steel, who had once been legend. One of the pilots whispered into the comms, disbelief heavy in his tone. "Viper?" The tower fell silent. Heads turned toward her. The controllers stared, wide-eyed, as though seeing her for the first time. She ignored them, her focus locked on the jets. 3. Ease your throttle, don't fight it. 2. You've got visual, take temporary lead. 4. Stay tight on 3's wing. I've got you. Keep it clean. Keep it steady. Her words cut through the static like steel. The formation stabilized. The Raptors fell into rhythm, their jagged movements smoothing into cohesion. Slowly, methodically, she pulled them out of danger. In that moment, 12 years of silence evaporated. She was no longer Evelyn Carter, civilian consultant. She was Viper again. Minutes stretched like hours. The tower watched, breathless, as she guided the formation with precision born of instinct, not charts. Her hands moved in the air, as though she were flying the maneuvers herself. Her eyes tracked the blips on the radar like prey. Every command she gave was exact, unshakable. Finally, the Raptors corrected course, steady and controlled. The immediate danger was over. But in the tower, no one breathed. Evelyn lowered the headset slowly, her hand trembling as though the weight of 12 years had just collapsed on her shoulders. Around her, the room remained frozen, every eye locked on her. The silence was deafening. Then, over the comms, a single voice broke it. "Confirmed stable," a pilot said softly. "Formation holding. Tower. Thanks. And, Viper, if that's really you, it's an honor." Her name hung in the air like thunder. Viper. Evelyn Carter closed her eyes. The mask she had worn for so long had cracked wide open, and there was no hiding now. For the first time in 12 years, the skies had called her back. And she had answered. The control tower was unnervingly quiet. The radar blips steadied, the emergency alarms had been silenced, and the F-22 Raptors soared in clean formation once again. But inside the glass-walled room, every pair of eyes remained fixed not on the screens, but on the woman who had just saved them. Evelyn Carter stood motionless, headset in hand, her breath slowing after the storm of commands she had given. She wanted desperately to melt back into the anonymity she had built for herself, to slip away unnoticed. But the silence told her it was too late. It wasn't the silence of relief. It was recognition. One of the younger controllers, barely out of training, whispered first. His voice trembled with disbelief, but it carried across the tower. "Viper." The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. A call sign spoken as both question and statement, as if the very air didn't quite believe what it had just heard. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She had not heard that name aloud in 12 years. The syllables struck her like a bullet. Viper, the name carved into briefing boards, painted onto helmets, whispered through barracks with reverence. A name she had buried the day she walked away. Now resurrected. "Is it really her?" Another voice asked, hushed but sharp. "I thought she retired years ago." "Retired?" "No, she disappeared." "They said she was." "Gone." The whispers tumbled into a current, disbelief clashing with awe. Evelyn didn't look at them. She kept her gaze on the radar, pretending the emergency still required her full focus. But inside, her chest ached. She had spent so long hiding, and in a single moment, all her efforts had unraveled. The tower chief, a seasoned colonel with graying temples, finally broke the spell. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on her. Unlike the others, he didn't whisper. He spoke in a low, steady tone that carried the weight of years. "Carter," he said softly. "Or should I say, Viper?" Evelyn met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the old warrior inside her stirred. She wanted to deny it, to shake her head, to pretend the whispers were wrong. But she knew the truth. Her voice on the comms had already betrayed her. No one commanded like that unless they had lived it. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The colonel's lips pressed into a thin line. He gave a slow nod, the kind that carried respect, and turned back toward the controllers. "You heard her," he said firmly. "That formation is stable because of her. Get medical support ready when they land. Move." His order snapped the others into motion. The whispers faded as the controllers dove back into their duties, their professionalism kicking in. But the glances didn't stop. Every few seconds, eyes flicked back to Evelyn, curious, reverent, uncertain. Then the comms crackled again. "Tower, this is Raptor 2. Confirm status." And the pilot hesitated, his voice raw with emotion. "Confirm? Was that really her?" Was that Viper? The tower froze once more. All eyes shifted back to Evelyn. Her fingers clenched around the headset, and for a long moment she considered silence, letting the myth hang in the air, unclaimed. But then she heard the younger pilot's voice again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Ma'am, if it's you, it's an honor." Her throat tightened. Against her will, she lifted the headset back to her lips. She spoke slowly, carefully, but the steadiness of her voice betrayed her. "This is Viper," she said. The room held its breath. On the other end, the formation erupted in relief. "Copy that, Viper," one pilot said, the sharpness in his tone now laced with respect. "We've got it from here." Another chimed in. Hell of a voice to hear in the skies again. Their words twisted like a knife and a balm all at once. Pride, guilt, nostalgia, they collided in Evelyn's chest until she could hardly breathe. She set the headset down gently, as though afraid it might burn her fingers. The Raptors landed safely minutes later. Emergency crews swarmed the runway, medics rushing to the collapsed pilot. From the tower windows, Evelyn could see the others taxi their jets into neat lines, the sunlight glinting off their canopies. Even at a distance, she could feel the energy. They knew who had guided them home. Inside the tower, the colonel approached her. His boots echoed against the tile floor, deliberate and heavy. When he stopped before her, his voice carried no accusation, only certainty. "I didn't believe the rumors when I first heard them," he said. "That you just walked away. But I see it now. You tried to bury her." He paused, searching her face. "And yet, here she is." Evelyn held his gaze, but said nothing. Words felt dangerous. "You saved 4 lives today," the colonel continued. "And not just any lives, 4 of our best. You didn't just step in, Carter. You proved the legend wasn't a myth." The word legend made her flinch. She had never thought of herself that way. To her, she was simply a pilot who did her job, who made mistakes, who carried ghosts. But to them, she had become a story larger than life. And now that story was standing in their tower, flesh and blood. Around them, the controllers worked, but their ears strained for every word. Some stole glances at her with shy admiration, others with open awe. One young officer, cheeks flushed with excitement, blurted out what many were thinking. "My dad used to tell me about you," he said. "He flew in your era. He said Viper was the sharpest damn ace he ever saw. I never thought I'd meet you in person." Evelyn's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him not to believe the stories, that the truth was messier, uglier, less heroic. But the light in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't just respect, it was hope. To him, to all of them, she wasn't just a name. She was proof. Proof that skill, courage, and instinct could still carve a path through chaos. For the first time in years, Evelyn realized something painful. Her silence hadn't erased her. It had only left others to fill the void with legend. The colonel leaned closer, his voice quieter now. "They need to hear from you. Not the myth. You. Tell them why you left. Tell them what you've seen. Because right now, Carter, they'd follow you anywhere." She stared at him, the weight of his words heavy on her shoulders. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But she also knew she couldn't vanish again, not after today. The moment the young pilot had called her name on the comms, her cover had shattered. The world knew Viper was still alive. Evelyn exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to the console as though steadying herself against a storm. She didn't promise the colonel anything, but she didn't deny it either. Outside, the Raptor's engines roared to silence, and the pilots climbed down from their cockpits. Some of them turned their helmets toward the tower, as though searching for a glimpse of the woman who had guided them home. They would see her soon enough. For now, Evelyn Carter remained where she was, caught between the life she had built and the legend that refused to die. The recognition had begun. And once again, the name Viper soared through the halls of the United States Air Force. The runway shimmered under the afternoon sun, waves of heat bending the air above the tarmac. 4 F-22 Raptors taxied in tight formation, their sleek silhouettes cutting across the sky like predators tamed at last. Inside the tower, the crew moved with brisk efficiency, but their eyes kept flicking toward Evelyn Carter. The woman they thought they knew, a quiet consultant, had just guided a flight through chaos like it was second nature. And now, as the Raptors prepared to land, the tower waited for her next move. The colonel, standing at her side, didn't have to say anything. His silence was permission enough. Evelyn picked up the headset again, the weight of it heavy but familiar. For 12 years, she had avoided this exact feeling, the surge of command, the intoxicating control of steel, and sky bending to her voice. And yet, when she spoke, the old cadence slipped out like a reflex. Raptor 2, you've got lead. Confirm. Copy, tower. Lead confirmed. 3, hold close on 2's wing. Don't let him drift. 4, keep your spacing steady. You're flying tighter than you think. Trust your instruments. Her tone wasn't just calm. It carried steel. The kind of voice pilots craved in a storm. Sharp, unshakable, impossible to ignore. The younger controllers in the tower listened in awe. They could hear it too. This wasn't theory. This wasn't simulation. This was Viper. On the runway below, ground crews lined up, helmets tilted upward. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Viper was in the tower. Some of them had been kids when she'd been flying, but they knew the name. Stories of her impossible maneuvers, her uncanny awareness, her iron command, tales that sounded like exaggerations until now. Inside the cockpit of Raptor 2, the young pilot swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He had the stick, but he didn't feel like the leader. The real leader was in his ear, guiding him step by step. Her presence filled his headset like a lifeline. Ease into approach, Evelyn said. You're coming in shallow. Correct 2 degrees. Good. 3, matches angle. 4, you're lagging. Tighten that spacing. The Raptors responded instantly, sliding into precise alignment. The tower screens lit with clean vectors, the formation correcting into perfection. Evelyn's eyes tracked their descent, every shift and wobble absorbed into instinct. She didn't just see the jets. She felt them, as though her muscles were still wired to wings. Her hand hovered in the air, moving unconsciously with the Raptor's approach, mimicking rolls and throttle shifts. The controllers saw it and didn't laugh. They watched, captivated. The colonel leaned closer. Like you never left, he murmured. Evelyn ignored him. Her focus was on the sky. At 200 feet, the Raptors dipped lower, engines thundering as the runway stretched wide before them. This was the dangerous part. Heavy jets, tight formation, and one pilot unconscious. Evelyn's voice cut in, steady as a scalpel. 2, hold steady. 3, you're drifting low. Correct now. 4, adjust throttle. Easy, easy. There you go. The jets touched down almost as one, wheels screaming against asphalt. The formation rolled forward, parachutes blooming like silver blossoms behind them. The emergency crews swarmed, racing to the collapsed leader's jet, but the other 3 Raptors slowed into clean taxi lines. The tower erupted in cheers. Controllers slapped backs, some whistling, others exhaling relief so loud it echoed. But Evelyn didn't celebrate. She lowered the headset with careful precision and set it on the console. Her shoulders sagged with the weight of adrenaline and memory. She wanted to step back, to fade into the crowd, But it was too late. The room wasn't watching the Raptors anymore. They were watching her. The colonel gave her a slow, measured nod. That was command, he said. Not theory. Not memory. Command. You're still Viper. The younger controllers couldn't hold back their awe. Did you hear that? One whispered. The way they snapped into line? She flew them down without touching a stick. It was like she never left the cockpit. Evelyn turned away, her jaw tight. She had saved them, yes. But every word, every maneuver had dragged her back into a world she had tried to escape. Her chest ached with the weight of ghosts, missions she hadn't spoken of in years, friends she had lost, choices she couldn't undo. And yet, when she looked out at the runway, she felt it again. That electric hum, the sense of belonging. The sky had called her back, and she had answered without hesitation. On the comms, Raptor 3's pilot broke in again, his voice trembling with excitement. Tower, correction, Viper, we owe you one. All of us. Copy that, said Raptor 4, younger, brasher. Flying with you was like the stories, ma'am. Damn honor. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. She didn't want their praise. She didn't want to be their hero. But the reverence in their voices told her she had no choice. The legend of Viper had returned, whether she wanted it or not. The colonel crossed his arms, watching her closely. You can't put this back in the box, Carter, he said quietly. They know now. The Raptors know. And once the Air Force knows, the whole damn country will too. She shot him a look. I didn't ask for this. No, he agreed. But sometimes the sky doesn't ask. It just takes who it needs. Evelyn looked back at the Raptors, their canopies glinting in the sun, crews swarming around them. For 12 years, she had walked away. For 12 years, she had been just Evelyn Carter, quiet civilian, forgotten ace. But in one emergency, one call sign, the mask had shattered. She was Viper again. And deep down, despite the fear and the ghosts, part of her knew she had never truly stopped being Viper. The base had seen countless landings, but none like this. The Raptors had touched down in flawless formation, guided by a voice long thought gone, and now the story was spreading across the flight line like wildfire. Vipers in the tower. No way, that's impossible. Did you hear her voice? That was her. Ground crews lingered, medics rushed, officers whispered, and pilots stared across the runway toward the control tower. Everyone wanted confirmation. Everyone wanted to see if the legend was truly alive. Inside, Evelyn Carter stood with her back to the glass, headset resting on the console. Her body still hummed with adrenaline, but her face was calm, composed. The colonel stood beside her, watching her with a mixture of admiration and calculation. He knew what was coming. She knew it too. The unmasking. Down on the tarmac, the canopy of the lead Raptor popped open. Medics climbed the ladder, pulling the unconscious pilot from his seat, strapping him onto a stretcher. But the other 3 jets powered down smoothly, their pilots climbing out with helmets tucked under their arms. They didn't rush to the hangar, didn't scatter to debriefs. Instead, as if drawn by instinct, they turned toward the tower. They're coming, the colonel said softly. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had commanded hundreds of missions, faced enemies at Mach speeds, outflown missiles, and lived through firestorms. But this, facing the eyes of young pilots who had grown up on her legend, terrified her in a way the skies never had. The tower's elevator dinged. Boots echoed on metal stairs. The door opened, and the first of the pilots stepped through. He was younger than she expected, no older than 25, his flight suit darkened with sweat. His helmet hung loosely at his side, forgotten. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her, and then he froze. The others followed, filing in one by one, still in flight gear, faces flushed from the heat of the cockpit and the heat of disbelief. The room went quiet again. Controllers shifted awkwardly, sensing the weight of the moment. It was Raptor 2 who broke the silence, the pilot who had taken the lead when she ordered him to. His voice cracked slightly, but it carried. "Ma'am, is it really you?" Evelyn held his gaze, her throat tight. She wanted to deny it, to shrug, to say she was just a consultant who knew a few things. But the truth was written across every face in the room. They had already recognized her, in her voice, in her command, in the way she had flown them from the ground. She exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm Viper." The words felt heavy, final, like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. The pilots exchanged looks, disbelief giving way to awe. One of them, younger, brash, the one who had been drifting out of formation, shook his head in wonder. "My God," he whispered. "We thought you were gone." Everyone thought. He trailed off, as if afraid to say the word dead. Evelyn's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. Not gone, just quiet. The colonel stepped forward, his voice carrying authority. "Pilots, you owe your lives to her. She stabilized your flight when no one else could. Whatever stories you've heard, they're true. More than true." But the colonel's endorsement wasn't needed. The respect in the pilot's eyes said it all. They were standing in front of their myth, flesh and blood. Raptor 3 took a hesitant step closer. He looked younger than the rest, barely past cadet years. His voice wavered, full of raw emotion. "My father. He flew with you once," he said. "He told me stories about Viper, about the way you flew like you could see 3 moves ahead. He said if we ever had someone like you in the air again, we'd be unstoppable." He paused, his throat tight. "I never thought I'd get to hear your voice myself." Evelyn's chest ached. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she wasn't unstoppable, that every ace carried scars, that legends were built on survival, not perfection. But the hope in his eyes stopped her. For him, for all of them, Viper was proof that greatness was possible. Another pilot, sweat dripping from his temple, spoke up. "You didn't just save us. You commanded us. Like you'd never left. How?" Evelyn's answer was quiet, but firm. "Instinct doesn't fade. You can bury it, but when the moment comes, it's there, always." The pilots nodded, as though she had confirmed something sacred. Behind them, the young controllers whispered again. They had seen it too, the way she had cut through chaos, the way she had made fear vanish with a single order. She wasn't just a pilot. She was command. The colonel's voice broke the reverent silence. "You understand what this means, Carter," he said. "Your cover is gone. You can't walk out of here pretending you're just another civilian." Her jaw clenched. "I didn't come here to be unmasked." "No," he agreed. But the sky had other plans. And so did they? He gestured toward the pilots, who stood like disciples before her. Evelyn looked at them, their flushed faces, their trembling hands still buzzing with adrenaline, their eyes wide with admiration. She saw herself in them, 12 years younger, before the scars, before the weight of history. Part of her wanted to turn and walk away, to reclaim her quiet life. But another part, the part that had surged alive when she held the comms, when the Raptors fell into her rhythm, whispered a truth she couldn't ignore. Viper was still needed. She drew herself upright, her posture instinctively slipping back into command. "You did well today," she said to the pilots. "You listened. You adapted. That's why you're alive." Their eyes widened at the praise. "But don't mistake luck for skill," she continued, her tone sharp now. "If you'd hesitated 1 second longer, we'd be pulling wreckage off the runway. You want to fly Raptors? Then you'd better be sharper, cleaner, tighter. The sky won't forgive mistakes. The words landed like a briefing, sharp, instructive, impossible to argue with. The pilots straightened unconsciously, their bodies reacting like cadets before an instructor. Evelyn almost laughed at the reflex, but she didn't. She let the silence hang, heavy and commanding. Then softer, she added, and never forget, the voice in your ear won't always be there. One day, you'll be the one others depend on. Don't waste that. The youngest pilot nodded, his throat tight. Yes, ma'am. The colonel smiled faintly, as though confirming what he already knew. There she is, he murmured. Not just Viper the legend. Viper the leader. Evelyn looked out the tower window one last time. The Raptors gleamed under the sun, engines cooling, canopies reflecting light like mirrors. Down on the ground, word was still spreading. Crews pointing toward the tower, officers gathering in small knots, all of them whispering the same name. Her name. The unmasking was complete. Evelyn Carter was Viper again. And this time, there would be no going back. A hangar echoed with quiet awe. Outside, the sun was dipping low, painting the runway in shades of gold and orange, reflecting off the sleek F-22 Raptors that now rested in perfect alignment. Inside, Evelyn Carter, no Viper, stood surrounded by the pilots she had guided to safety, the crew who had witnessed her return to the skies, and officers whose eyes now recognized the legend firsthand. For 12 years, she had lived as a civilian, a quiet professor with no call signs, no medals on display, no recognition. She had believed that leaving her past behind would erase her, that silence could bury a legend. But the events of the day proved otherwise. Viper could not be contained, and neither could the truth. The youngest pilot, still in flight gear, finally spoke, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and excitement. Ma'am, I don't even know what to say. We've heard the stories. But seeing you, hearing you, it's larger than life? Evelyn offered quietly, a faint, tired smile tugging at her lips. He nodded, wide-eyed. Exactly. The colonel, standing a few steps behind her, gave a knowing look. Viper, today wasn't just about landing 4 jets safely. It was about showing these pilots what leadership looks like, and what you've given them. Well, it'll last longer than any mission report. Evelyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Pride. Not the pride of accolades or medals, but the quiet, steady pride of a pilot who had done her duty, who had lived the life she had chosen, and who had returned when the sky demanded it. She turned her gaze toward the pilots, seeing more than fear or admiration. She saw potential, determination, and trust, qualities that once saved her in dogfights, and that would now shape the next generation of airmen. You listen, she said softly, but firmly. Flying these machines isn't about ego. It's about precision, instinct, and trust. Trust in your instruments, trust in your wingmen, and trust in yourself. The sky doesn't care about your excuses. It only rewards preparation and respect. The room absorbed her words. For a moment, silence reigned, the weight of her presence, her authority, and her legend hanging over them like a tangible force. A pilot stepped forward, younger, his voice quieter now but filled with resolve. We understand now, and thank you for guiding us, for showing us, his gaze faltered, for showing us what it means to be Viper. Evelyn looked away briefly, blinking back a flicker of emotion. She had avoided this acknowledgement for so long, fearing it would chain her to the past she had tried to escape. Yet standing there, seeing the impact she had on these pilots, she realized something profound. A legend was not just about what one did alone, but what one inspired in others. It was mentorship, leadership, legacy. Today wasn't about me, she said finally, voice steady. It was about all of you. Remember the lessons, not just the tactics, but the discipline, the instinct, and the responsibility that comes with flying. Every decision matters. Every second counts. Don't ever forget that. Her words struck a chord. The pilots nodded, understanding more than just the literal meaning. They understood her history, her weight, and the sacrifices she had carried silently for over a decade. The colonel stepped closer, a small, approving smile on his face. We've lost too many like you before, Carter. Too many legends who vanished quietly. Not this time. You're needed, whether you want it or not. She let out a slow breath. He was right. She had tried to leave her past behind, tried to live quietly, tried to bury Viper. But some legacies cannot be hidden, and some callings cannot be ignored. The pilots, now more confident, began asking questions, technical queries about maneuvers, scenarios they might face, and how to respond in emergencies. Evelyn answered them all, patient, precise, occasionally letting small hints of humor slip through. She realized she could merge her past and present, the mentor, the professor, the ace pilot, all in one. Outside, the remaining crew and base personnel watched with awe as the legend in person guided the conversation, her energy commanding attention and respect. Stories would be told, but now they would be grounded in truth, the living proof of Viper. Later, alone for a brief moment, Evelyn stepped outside the hangar. The sky stretched above her, the clouds painted with the pink and gold of sunset. She could feel the wind brushing against her face, hear the faint echoes of engines from distant aircraft, and taste the freedom that had always drawn her to the sky. And for the first time in 12 years, she felt complete. Viper was not just a name from the past. She was a force in the present, a guide for the future. She had returned not just to save pilots, but to reclaim her own truth. She had buried the mask of Evelyn Carter long enough. Now, there was no mask, only the woman who had always belonged in the sky. The base would talk about this day for years. The day the legend returned, not for glory, but because she was needed. The young pilots would tell stories of Viper guiding them from the tower, her calm, commanding voice cutting through chaos, her instincts flawless, and her courage unwavering. And Evelyn Carter, Viper, would continue to guide them. Because some legends aren't meant to fade. Some are meant to endure. Some are meant to teach, to inspire, to protect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the runway, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. She had reclaimed her place, not as a myth whispered in barracks, not as a forgotten ace lost to time, but as a living, breathing force of skill, courage, and leadership. Viper was home. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter embraced it fully. Her legacy was no longer hidden. It was real, tangible, and alive, carried forward not only in her own deeds, but in the pilots who had witnessed her return, in the students who would learn her lessons, and in the very sky that had always called her name. The legend had returned, and this time it would endure.